Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Krotz, the director of the Centre for Literatures in Canada, the Centre de Littérature au Canada. I am so happy that you are spending your Friday evening with us tonight here on Treaty 6 territory and Districts 9 and 10 of the Métis Nation of Alberta. As many of you know, we are celebrating tonight. A little bit of magic has been happening on this Kreisel Lecture stage for 20 years now. And the Writer in Residence program has been hosting writers from across Canada at the University of Alberta for 50 years. These 20th and 50th anniversaries are significant, but I want to pause for a moment before we begin our festivities to acknowledge a much longer history of storytelling in this place. Known to many as Amiskwachi-Waskagan, this area by the beautiful North Saskatchewan River has been a pehonan, or gathering place, for thousands of years. Since time immemorial, Indigenous nations, including Nehiawak, Niitsitapi, Nakota, Dene, and Anishinaabe, have been crafting and telling stories, singing, and sharing poetry on this land. So it is an enormous privilege to be here, gathering now with people from all over the world to think about the power of storytelling and place. You're in for many treats tonight, but I am not one of them, so I'm going to keep the rest of my words of thanks brief. My deepest gratitude goes to the authors who have come together tonight to offer this unique, cross-pollinating lecture: Richard Van Camp, Shani Mootoo, and Lise Gaboury-Diallo. Huge thanks, too, to Senator Paula Simons for generously sharing her time and enthusiasm for literature as our host tonight. And thank you to the many people who have made this event possible: CLC staff and volunteers, sponsors, partners, and donors. You know who you are, and we love you all. We could not have pulled this off tonight without the support of the Writer in Residence program, of Dr. Eric Schloss, of the Canada Research Chair in Black and Decolonial Studies, Michael Buckner, the Alumni Office at the U of A, and last but not least, the Faculty of Arts. And here to represent the faculty and give a few more important words of gratitude is Dr. Marie Carrière, Vice Dean Research and, as many of you know, former director of the CLC. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Carrière.
Merci Sarah et bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Au nom du doyen Robert Wood et en mon nom personnel, je tiens à vous dire à quel point nous sommes ravis de célébrer le 20e anniversaire du Centre de littérature au Canada. C'est un immense plaisir de voir autant d'anciens, de partenaires communautaires, de professeurs et d'étudiantes parmi nous ce soir. J'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue tout particulièrement à la sénatrice Paula Simons, que vous aurez le plaisir d'entendre dans quelques instants. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to Philip and Mary Jane Kreisel, who join us this evening. Of course, this 20th anniversary celebration would not have been possible without the incredible support of my favorite book collector, Dr. Eric Schloss, and of the late, marvelous Alexis Schloss. Their generous founding gift and continued support of the CLC over the years have led us to this exciting moment. As former director of the CLC, I just want to say that it has been a privilege, as I know it is for Sarah, to work with you, Dr. Schloss, and I sort of feel like this is sort of your anniversary as well. As for the CLC, it remains a point of pride for this university. It is the only French-English literature center in Canada. It is recognized nationally and internationally, and it has served over these past 2 decades as a unique forum for public, scholarly, and cultural exchange between authors, researchers, students, and readers. The CLC Lecture series was inaugurated in 2007 and celebrates the vision of an important figure who worked on our campus from the 1950s through to the 1980s. In addition to serving as the chair of English and vice president academic for the Faculty of Arts and the University of Alberta, Henry Kreisel introduced and taught the first courses in Canadian literature at the university, focusing especially on the immigrant experience and Indigenous voices. I would like to thank the Centre for having kept Professor Kreisel's legacy alive through this very special lecture series, namely Director Sarah Krotz and her team, and the University of Alberta Press, a longtime partner that publishes the Kreisel series with the Centre. Now, as you've heard already, this evening marks another momentous occasion, the 50th anniversary of the Writer-in-Residence program, which is hosted by the Department of English and Film Studies. This initiative was started in 1976 by Rudy Wiebe, one of Canada's most celebrated authors and a cherished professor of writing in the Faculty of Arts for over 25 years. I would like to thank Jason Kapalka for his philanthropic contribution to the Writer-in-Residence program and to the Stephen Kapalka and Darren Zenko Writing Prizes. Jason's gift has been key to the well-being and growth of the program and has ensured that writers will always find a home at the University of Alberta. The Writer-in-Residence program is the longest running in the country. Its list of writers serves as a record of Canada's most distinguished authors, each of whom has performed an essential service by mentoring the next generation of creative writers. It is now my pleasure to invite to the stage Senator Paula Simons, who will be our host for the night. The Honourable Paula Simons was appointed to the Senate of Canada in 2018 after a long and distinguished career as a newspaper and broadcast journalist. She currently serves on the Standing Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs and the Standing Senate Committee on Transport and Communications and is the host of the podcast Alberta Unbound. Senator Simons holds a master's degree in communications from Stanford University, as well as an honors degree in English literature from the University of Alberta, which is where we are. And she, in fact, studied with Henry Kreisel. Alors, je vous souhaite une excellente soirée et je vous prie de vous joindre à moi pour accueillir chaleureusement la sénatrice Simons.
Hello, bonsoir, adante antanse. Je suis tellement heureuse, tellement fière d'être ici avec vous ce soir, and I'm especially happy to be back home in Amiskwaci, Waskahagan, where we are all treaty people. I flew in from Ottawa not many hours ago, and I could not be more delighted to be here with you tonight. I am, as you've heard, a proud alumna of the University of Alberta and the Department of English, where I developed my passion for Canadian literature, especially modernist Canadian literature, in the classrooms of Dr. Greg Hollingshead and Dr. Paul Yardison. But while I had many marvelous profs in the English department, one of the most magical professors with whom I studied wasn't in the Department of English at all, at least not when I was a student, because I was one of the last group of students to have the privilege and joy of studying with Dr. Henry Kreisel. It was in the mid-1980s, by which time Dr. Kreisel had been named a university professor, which meant that he could teach, hypothetically, in any department of the university. Luckily for me, he hadn't chosen engineering or botany, but rather comparative literature. And so it was that I was able to join him around the giant table in the old Senate chamber of the old Arts Building for marvelous seminars in international modern theater. We studied Samuel Beckett and Eugene Ionesco and Bertolt Brecht and Harold Pinter and August Strindberg, with Dr. Kreisel bringing their absurdities and their delights to life as we read and discussed them around the table. He was a man of such charm, such worldly wisdom. Listening to his mellifluous Mitteleuropäische voice in the elegance of the Senate chamber, we felt almost as if we were sitting in Prague or Vienna or Paris in one of the world's great and ancient universities. And when Henry Kreisel talked about the great modernists and absurdists and existentialists, we knew there was a weight behind his words, a powerful poignancy, the shadow of the unspeakable loss we knew he had endured as a refugee from the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust. Born in 1922, he grew up in a comfortable intellectual family, something of a child prodigy. He published his first short story in a Viennese newspaper when he was just 15. But the rise of Hitler and the Anschluss of Austria exploded his life. In 1938, when he was 16, Kreisel and his family fled as refugees to England, where he found himself working in a Leeds garment factory in very Dickensian fashion. Things got worse. In 1940, the British government, concerned that the Kreisels and other refugees like them might be Nazi spies, which seems a little counterintuitive, arrested young Henry and his father and shipped them off to a series of internment and forced labor camps in Canada. Many Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria suffered the same fate. Among them were some of Europe's leading artists, musicians, scientists, academics, writers, the very people who'd been astute and well-connected enough to escape the Nazis before the Holocaust began in earnest. For Henry Kreisel, the internment experience was transformative in a way you might not have expected. Older camp members, some of the most brilliant minds in the world, set up their own sort of university and proceeded to share their knowledge with the younger prisoners. It strengthened Henry Kreisel's resolve to dedicate himself to literature. And taking Joseph Conrad as his model, he set out to make himself totally fluent in English, educating himself in the language of the new world and the new life he decided to embrace, and rejecting the language of Hitler. But when he asked the guards at the camp if they could bring him some examples of Canadian literature, they were baffled. They said, "There's no such thing." So he decided he'd better find some, and when he couldn't find what he wanted, he decided to write some. When he was finally liberated, he went on to a brilliant career as an academic, a university administrator, and a writer. His powerful novel, The Betrayal, captures the world of post-war Edmonton, a raw and hopeful boom city where thousands of immigrants from Europe were trying to build new lives. His magnificent short story collection, The Almost Meeting, so funny, so bittersweet, tells tales of prairie farmers who believe, not unreasonably, that the earth is flat, and of would-be small-town Alberta artists who wait, hopefully, for a traveling nude to come to their town to paint. I don't know that there's any other Canadian writer who did as masterful a job of capturing our mid-century multicultural modernism. And certainly no writer put Edmonton on the world literary stage so clearly, so honestly, and with so much knowing love. But my favorite Henry Kreisel story is a little more personal. When I graduated from the U of A in 1986, I will say as the gold medalist in English, my very proud parents threw me a giant graduation party. We convened a motley crew, all my classmates in the Honors English program, all my friends from the U of A debate club, all my favorite professors, and all my complicated extended family. Thus it was that Henry Kreisel was there, along with my great Aunt Mary, my beloved Tante Musia. Now, my Tante Musia was a very clever woman, but not an intellectual. She'd grown up in what is now Ukraine, but was then the Soviet Union, but she was an ethnic German, and German was her mother tongue. As a refugee who had come to Edmonton after the war, she lived in a tiny little home in North Edmonton and worked as a saleswoman at the Bay. Also, she was a legit party animal and an outrageous flirt. A kind of large, cheerful Valkyrie who liked a good drink. So imagine my surprise, my confusion, and my delight as I moved through the party and saw my Tante Musia and Henry Kreisel in loud and happy German conversation, which eventually evolved or perhaps devolved into singing. The sight of my urbane, sophisticated professor and my down-to-earth great-aunt enjoying each other's company so much was something I hadn't expected. But Henry Kreisel was the furthest thing from a snob. He was fascinated by people, all kinds of people, and the stories that they brought with them to this place. In this moment, when we see politicians abroad and at home doing their best to demonize immigrants and refugees, when internment camps are somehow back in fashion, we should seize this opportunity to reflect on the life and legacy of Henry Kreisel and all he did to tell Alberta's stories, build Alberta's flagship university, and put Edmonton on the literary map, literally. And in this time of rising anti-Semitism, we should reflect, too, on what the Jewish community has given to Edmonton and to this university. And here I speak not just of Dr. Kreisel, but of Dr. Eric Schloss, whose vision and generosity helped to create the Centre for Literatures in Canada and the Kreisel Lecture series. Without Eric and his brilliant wife, Alexis of blessed memory, these 20 years would not have been possible. Now, on to our proper program and our real guests. Tonight we will have the chance to hear from three very different Canadian writers, Richard Van Camp, Shani Mootoo, and Lise Gaboury-Diallo, each of whom is fascinated by the art of creating a sense of place, of telling stories rooted in residence. First up tonight, Richard Van Camp. Richard is a novelist, an essayist, but most of all, a wise and witty storyteller, with a keen sense that stories are a gift that help to build and maintain community. A Clicho Dene from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, Richard now lives here on Treaty 6 territory, but he's also the University of Victoria's Indigenous storyteller in residence. He is the author of 30 books. His classic coming-of-age story, The Lesser Blessed, celebrates its 30th anniversary this year. And Richard had to correct my math because I said 20 years because I didn't want to believe that 1996 was in fact 30 years ago. Meantime, his newest novel, Beast, was nominated for a Governor General's Award in 2025, and even I can do that math. That was last year. Here to tell us his story tonight, please welcome Richard Van Camp.
Masi Cho, Senator, Masi Cho. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Where's my family? Where's my wife? Oh, there they are. Give my wife, Kiwi Martin, a round of applause. Give my son, it's Ozzy Van Camp, a round of applause. Oh, Masi Cho. Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. It is a joy to be here with you tonight with my family and share the stage with Shani Mootoo and Lise Gaboury-Diallo. Please let me introduce myself in my mother's language, Clicho Dene. Richard Van Camp, CA, C. Hobitsa Gotsoete, Haniho, Edmonton, Nade, Sagamasi. My name is Richard Van Camp, and I was born in gorgeous Fort Smith, Northwest Territories on September 8, 1971. In Treaty 8 territory, and I've been living in Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory with my family for, about 15 years now. Masi Cho for having me here and including me in the celebration of storytelling, writing, and mentoring. I'm still so proud and grateful to have been the 39th University of Alberta Writer-in-Residence back in 2011 and 2012. Masi Cho for giving me this opportunity to write a love letter to Indigenous and Canadian writers that I admire and to name those who guide me and my writing to this very day as a reader and as a writer. 30 years ago, I published my first novel, The Lesser Blessed, with Douglas and McIntyre. I had no idea that when we published it, that I would be the first Clicho Dene to ever publish a novel. Since then, I've had the privilege of working with my elders, my family, and numerous knowledge keepers to write the stories of my dreams with my fantastic publishers and with the help of many tough editors. I've also had the pleasure of reading superb Indigenous literature that has bloomed before my very eyes. And this has inspired me in so many ways. And I just realized something. Indigenous writers weave their inko, their medicine power, into their stories. When you read Indigenous literature, you're not only reading the author's words, you're meeting their ancestors, and you're meeting their families. You get to see their customs, their traditions, their way in the world. And I am the biggest fan of Indigenous literature because it feeds my soul in ways other literatures can't. Each time I read Louise Half-Sky Dancer, Gregory Schofield, Marilyn Dumont, Cherie Demeline, Wabgishig Rice, Kathleen Lafferty, Mason Mantla, Scotty Olson, Gary Godfredson, Jesse Conrad, Monique Gray Smith, and Francine Cunningham, they carry me home. And I feel so much joy in sharing this with you. Read them, please. Just saying the names of my friends and heroes brings me strength. And I think I just thought of a new slogan for the global reading community. Want more good medicine in your life? Read Indigenous literature. Do you know what I love most about Indigenous literature? The success of one author is the success of all Indigenous authors. We break trail for each other. Each time someone reads Indigenous literature for the first time and has their socks blown off, there is a treasury of so much more, generations now, that's just waiting for this lucky reader to dive into. For the past few decades, I've had the privilege of watching Indigenous literature flourish because of our trailbreakers like Lee Miracle, Ruby Slipperjack, Jeanette Armstrong, Basil Johnson, Ala Tukaipali, Antoine Mountain, George Blondin, Marie Ann Hart Baker, Beatrice Colleton-Mossignier, Maria Campbell, and others take their courage and turn it into a literature of dreams. Because now I see Indigenous sci-fi, Indigenous speculative fiction, Indigenous horror, Indigenous romance, and the best part of being a fan is you never know who's going to publish what next. So anyone, anywhere, anytime can create something so magnificent it demolishes you and you are bedazzled with how on earth they did this. It's like the ultimate bannock making contest all the time. And it inspires me to always bring my very best bannock whenever I publish. Okay, so this is really important. If you can, check out Wabgishig Rice's Res Futuristic. Those are his words. I said, dude, I'm doing a talk. This is really important. How would you describe your series, The Moon of Crusted Snow and The Moon of Turning Leaves? He was like, dude, say Res Futuristic. Okay, so I said it. Check out Tiffany Morris's Horror, which she describes as swamp core. Check out Sri Demeline's speculative fiction novel, The Marrow Thieves. Check out Daniel Heath Justice's fantasy series, The Way of Thorn and Thunder, The Kinship Chronicles. Check out Katerina Vermette's time-traveling Métis graphic novel, Adventure in a Girl Called Echo, with artist Scott Henderson and colorist Donovan Yachuk. For ultimate darkness, check out Tanya Tagak's uncompromising Split Tooth, and Eden Robinson's mind-blowing Son of a Trickster, and Jessica John's Bad Cree. If you want the ultimate childhood ending story, check out Jamie C. Fournier's The Other Ones, with illustrations by Toma Fezo Ga. Check out Indigenous Horror in Never Whistle at Night, Volumes 1 and 2, Taktumi, Volumes 1 and 2, and Zegajimo, published by Kegadons Press. Check out the poetry of Kateri Akawenzi Dam, January Rogers, and Sharon Pruill Turner. Check out the incredible biographies of Jesse Thistle's From the Ashes and Minnie Ayodla Freeman's Life Among the Kalanut, and Tanya Talaga's Seven Fallen Feathers. Check out Jordan Abel. Check out Tennille Campbell, Billy Ray Belcourt, Teresa Wouters, Wayne Arthurson, Connor Kerr, Anna Marie Sewell, Matthew James Weigel, Lauren Simon, and Joshua Whitehead. Read the Honorable Murray Sinclair. Read his son, the equally Honorable Negon Sinclair. And check out this year's writer-in-residence at U of A, Cody Catano. You won't be disappointed, I promise. My friends, please allow me to locate myself and tell you where I was born and how my writing and storytelling began. Fort Smith is located on the Alberta-NWT border on the 60th parallel. We're the gateway to Wood Buffalo National Park. We're around 2,500 people. We are officially quadrilingual. What that means is Chipewyan, Cree, French, and English are spoken at any given time. We are also the Métis capital of the Northwest Territories. We have buffalo and bison 25 kilometers outside of our community, and we have moose. Oh, do we have moose? Earl Evans shared with me that there are moose 3 kilometers just across the rapids. Here I thought moose were 3 days away, and you had to grow a beard to even see one. And this shows you just how pitiful and lost I am without my elders. But I am so blessed to be able to call and text and nag my elders for information. Fort Smith has whooping cranes and sandhill cranes. We have pelicans, we have black bears, brown bears, and every once in a while, we have cinnamon bears. And we are the 3rd best place in the world to see the northern lights. You know, if you say you're the 3rd best anything, everyone believes you because you're humble. But I can say with utmost confidence that we are officially the hickey capital of Canada, and we can two-step to anything. The smartest thing I ever did when I was looking for elders and teachings was volunteer to be the handy bus driver in Fort Smith. This is back in 1991. I had the privilege of driving Fort Smith elders to bingo, and more bingo. I've probably been to more bingos than everybody here put together. And I was blessed enough to drive Fort Smith's royalty to the Northern Store and to Kaiser's for groceries. And I was able to drive my elders to their doctor appointments, and sometimes they just wanted to go for a cruise and watch the pelicans soar over the Slave River. Sometimes the elders just wanted to go visit their friends, What a sweet life. All that visiting I was able to take part in, all the stories, all the teachings, all the guidance I received that I use to this very day. It was during my time as the handy bus driver and guard for the RCMP that I began to understand the legacy and continuing harm of Canada's residential schools, the 60s scoop, and the foster care system. I've been quoted as saying that residential schools will always be the sorrow in Canada's bones, because it was during this time that I began to listen to the stories from our Fort Smith elders of what happened to their children and what happened to them at residential school. I wanted to get the numbers on how many Indigenous children were stolen and taken to residential schools across Canada, so I wrote to Dr. Marie Wilson, former Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner, author, and friend to the University of Alberta. She writes, regarding the children, we have always used the approximate number of 150,000 kids who went through the school system over the years. 80,000 were still alive at the time of the class action court case and settlement agreement, and of course, there are hundreds of thousands of intergenerational survivors still in our midst today. My mom, Rosa, and her brothers attended residential school. My mother attended 2 residential schools in Fort Smith, Brennett Hall and Grandin College. My mother's number was 12. Do you know what the goal of residential schools was, according to Bishop Grandin? We instill in them a pronounced distaste for the native life so that they will be humiliated when reminded of their origins. When they graduate from our institutions, the children have lost everything native except their blood. He is quoted saying this in 1875. My goodness, what murderous and hateful language. Think of all the suffering this government-supported policy caused and continues to cause. It was during my time as the handy bus driver and guard for the RCMP in Fort Smith that I started to understand that, as a witness to my own family and my own community's pain, I and the rest of us, either as first or second generation residential school survivors, were born into an inheritance we were all trying to find a language for because of residential schools. And sometimes it's literature that can help you find your way through grief. May I suggest the following books to help you understand the full continuing impact of residential schools. There's Michelle Good's 5 Little Indians, Richard Wagamese's Indian Horse, David Robertson and Julie Flett's children's book, When We Were Alone, David Robertson's graphic novel series, 7 Generations, A Plains Cree Saga, with artist Scott Henderson and colorist Donovan Yachuk, and check out Robert Arthur Alexi's novel, Porcupines and China Dolls, based on his lived experience with Grolier Hall in Inuvik. Our stories make us stronger. This is why every Indigenous book that celebrates what it means to be Indigenous is such sweet, soul-mending medicine for everyone to read. Indigenous literature is a return and a celebration of the return to wholeness and healing, and helping us find our own ways home so that we are proud of ourselves when we are reminded of our origins. Our bloodlines hum with grace and pride when we see how beautiful we are in books and on the big screen, in video games, in graphic novels, short stories, on the radio, on TV, and in podcasts. Indigenous authors are writing the medicine we need and deserve, and it is our time now to tell our stories our way. I'm 54 now, and I call our generation the bridge generation. I feel that because of what happened to our parents, our families, and our communities, so many of us as Indigenous creators are working so hard to reclaim what was almost lost. I heard some time ago that when you break a bone, the body overcompensates. That place that was broken actually becomes the strongest part of the body. So the healing that I see happening within Indigenous writing now is epic and global. And I also feel that's why so many Indigenous writers can write in so many genres and for so many age levels. We do this because our storytellers back home can reach this level of craft where when they share a story at a community gathering, they can reach everyone at every age in the room with the spirit of the story. I find that we as Indigenous authors are writing and telling stories for every age level to reach and share as many teachings, stories, and values as we can to reach those age levels, not only for the reading public, but we are writing for those age levels for what each of us as Indigenous writers were starving to read at that age for our own healing. Writers, sometimes we don't realize it at the time, but sometimes we're also writing the medicine that we need. My mentor, Lee Miracle, once said that writing was the greatest therapy. Auntie was right, as most aunties often are. Speaking of aunties, hey, did I tell you my mom Rosa used to babysit our Prime Minister when he was a baby? That's right, Mark Carney was born in Fort Smith. I think they raised nothing but champions there and great leaders. Anyhow, my mom Rosa said Mark was a good baby. He liked to eat, he liked to sleep, she said. He was a good-looking baby. He was so cute. He was so warm when I held him. Pretty sweet, hey? Let's give our Prime Minister Mark Carney a round of applause. And let's give my mommy a round of applause, too. For most writers, it is our editors who help us achieve a level of craft we could never reach alone. Our superpower as Indigenous writers is, it is our elders, our family, and our knowledge keepers, and our editors who can uplift us to create something that honors community. And we can create something that future generations can cherish and learn from and hold their heads high in beauty. At this time, I'd like to say that my career could only have happened with the support of my family, my elders, my knowledge keepers, my publishers, my editors, my collaborators, my friends, and the family of my heart, and especially my wife, Kiwi Martin, and our son, Idzazi Van Camp. Please give them a round of applause. Oh, by the way, I sat down and really thought of something about what it means to be a writer. To be a writer is to live a life where you're quietly begging to be struck by stray lightning over and over. And I'm talking about a lightning that dissolves you and returns you changed, with voice and with a vision that blooms into story. You live for this, you pray for this, you suffer for this, and you secretly love it. To be a mentor is to encourage and nurture this madness of lightning lust in others. And it is an absolute joy to see someone's career take off book by book, story by story. Masi Cho, University of Alberta, for asking me to be your writer in residence and contribute to your magic in the world. Gosh, I had so much fun. I was given an office with a PC computer that could still run floppy disks. And I had greedy access to a monster printer down the hall that could print up entire manuscripts in seconds. I also met writers who became friends for a lifetime, like my dear friend and brother, Lise Gregerson, who's here tonight. Where's Lise? Lise, where are you? Give him a round of applause. That's Lise Gregerson. If you can, check out his novel, Green Mountain Road. When Lise showed up with this manuscript, I knew I was in the presence of a world-class writer. And I've met so many other Alberta writers since then who've done so well with their careers. This program for me was my perfect welcome to Edmonton and Treaty 6 territory. Masi Cho, I am grateful. As I look at the esteemed list of authors who've served as writers in residence for the University of Alberta, I hold my hands up with absolute respect to all of them. Think of all the voices we've been able to uplift these past 50 years. I'm so very proud to be included with writers and heroes of mine like Shani Mootoo, Lise Gaboury-Diallo, Patrick Lane, Maria Campbell, Marian Engel, Lynn Cody, January Rogers, Tommy Swarton, Wayne Arthurson, Marilyn Dumont, and more. There's medicine in our stories, and stories remind us what it means to be human together. Please read Indigenous literature. There's intergenerational and community healing and joy here for everyone. I think when we write and share good medicine stories, our ancestors dance, our families smile, and the world is a far more precious place to be in for everyone. Thank you, everybody. Let's have a great night.
Thank you so much, Richard. Merci cho and hi hi. Now, I am delighted to introduce Shani Mootoo. Shani is a video maker, a visual artist, a poet, but perhaps most of all, a novelist. She has been nominated for the Giller Award 4 times. She's been long-listed for the Booker Prize and short-listed for the Lambda Literary Prize, and she's won so many other literary prizes that I cannot long-list them all here. Born in Ireland, raised in Trinidad, and a Canadian by choice, she burst upon Canada's literary scene 30 years ago. The same year that Richard Van Camp published his first novel, she published her first novel, an extraordinary novel, Sirius Blooms at Midnight. But I've just finished reading her newest novel, Starry, Starry Night, a luminous, completely immersive story about a young girl's complicated childhood in Trinidad, and I cannot stop raving about it. It's for sale out in the lobby, and you should buy one. But I will stop raving now and turn the stage over to the luminous Shani Mootoo.
Thank you very much. It's really good to be here. And Richard, you were clearly struck by lightning when you were writing your speech. On September 10th, 2001, I arrived my first time in Edmonton to take up my post at the university here as the writer-in-residence. My first night was spent at the home of Doug and Sharon Barber in the guest room downstairs while they were away. On the morning of the 11th, I went up to the kitchen to make breakfast and turned on the television to see what had been happening while I'd been making my way by car from Vancouver. I thought I'd turned into a program on dystopian futures, so I switched to another channel, just in time to see a plane fly right into the second tower. And so began my 3.5-month stay in the city and my first stint anywhere as a writer-in-residence. Besides reading manuscripts from students, a couple from professors and people in the city and well beyond, I made special friends here, which have lasted to date. And I wrote a draft of my second novel, He Drowned, She in the Sea. I'd been warned that second novels are notoriously difficult, but you can't get to a third without writing that second. So just get it over with in order to arrive at the third. But the appointment as writer-in-residence was to me a recognition that made me want to write the work of that second and to take it very seriously. I remember deciding, with gratitude to Doug and the university, that I would work on it as if it were the first book I'd ever written, and as if it were already my third. And I'm forever grateful to have been taken seriously after that one novel, for Sirius Blooms at Night, for the time and space, and for a salary to experience what it was like to work like a real writer. And now another honor to share the stage with Richard and Lise, marking the anniversary celebration as past writers in residence, and now as participants in this particular Kreisel Lecture series. Thank you so much to the Centre for Literatures in Canada for including me here tonight. And Senator Simons, thank you so very much for your introduction. Perhaps it is an affliction of some kind to never fully be where one is, to always imagine or dream of being elsewhere. An affliction contracted maybe by too much reading, too much literature. A symptom of this affliction is that one is always dreaming outside of one's boundaries. If you were a girl, the kind I once was, and grew up like I did on an island, on book series like the Enid Blyton's, the famous 5, you might have yearned to be the girl George, or the kind, brave boy Julian, traipsing all over the island as if your parents owned it. This early reading taught you that girls could have power and brains and could solve mysteries and save their world. But your reality was that girls were not to act like this in your Trinidad. When you played with your boy cousins, it was understood that they were the cowboys, and you, a girl, would either be the Indian they were meant to capture or the girl they had to save. and having realized from what you were reading that you were confined by boundaries, you dreamed yourself off your island. My Trinidad High School English literature education was much like that of any student in countries around the world, including Canada, that had been colonized by Britain. We read Jane Austen, Dickens, Woolf, the Brontes, etc. The social constructs and the settings of their stories, formal gardens, estates, castles, intrigued us. So foreign were they to us. The English language in those books was exotic and had nothing to do with the kind spoken in our schoolyard, at home, and on the streets. And that foreign world of books was what was meant by literature. If you'd ever hoped to one day write stories, you knew you'd only be legitimate if you copied those authors. But in my last year of high school in Trinidad, a concerted effort to transition from colonial structures to a syllabus pertinent to our lived experience was underway. A novel called A Year in San Fernando by a then little-known Trinidadian named Michael Anthony appeared on the A-level English literature syllabus. I'd already fallen in love with Virginia Woolf and practiced writing like her. But how strange it was that Anthony's characters could easily have been people I knew. I recognized streets and buildings in his depiction of the hillside town of San Fernando where I went to school. And for the first time in a book in literature, people spoke in Trinidadian English. I next read A House for Mr. Biswas by another Trinidadian, V.S. Naipaul, who resided in England. His work had not yet been included in the English literature syllabus, but his book showed our little colonized country of mostly brown and black people to be ripe with stories, and it too was literature. But just as I was discovering literary Trinidad, I was about to leave for university abroad here in Canada. I came on a student visa to the University of Western Ontario. And graduating after 4 years with a BFA, I returned to Trinidad, taking with me a novel by a writer who was unknown to me. Back then, I couldn't put it down. That book, The Edible Woman, felt subversive, and I hid myself away to read it. It confirmed what I'd come to suspect, that I would have to leave the confines of my island home in order to freely search for answers to everything. So in 1981, I returned to Canada and eventually became a citizen. 16 years later, in 1997, my first novel, written here in Canada, Sirius Blooms at Night, was shortlisted for the Giller Prize. Sirius, set in a fictionalized country based on my back home, could not at the time have been written back there. And at the Giller ceremony, I actually met the Edible Woman lady. She and her book had pointed me beyond my country, and there she was in the room with me. In the room's shadows were Michael Anthony and V.S. Naipaul, too. I'd taken lessons from them in how to put our words to the place I would write about again and again, but always only from a distance. Now, this next section of my talk is titled, You Have to Know Yourself First, Then Maybe Others Will Know You. A quotation stolen from University Professor Henry Kreisel. The immigrant today is perpetually caught in different kinds of nets and is easily rendered either invisible or dangerously hypervisible. But the immigrant writer's cultural origins, or indeed others with non-normative identities combined with Canadian citizenship or residency, invokes a potentially equivocal notion of hybridity. So-and-so is Irish Trinidadian. So-and-so is Irish Trinidadian Canadian. Irish Indo-Trinidadian Canadian. Irish, Indo, Trinidadian, Canadian, lesbian. To me, hybridity looms in the phrase literatures in Canada. Can pointing to hybridity, I wonder, also ascribe a dubious status of outsiderness? When is this outsiderness useful, a desired concomitant of a writer? When is it a hindrance, or these days, dangerous? Identification within recognizable boundaries, within that is what I call microstates, has been necessary to afford one status outside of the boundary. But when ideologies founded on money, authoritarianisms around the world, and the out-loud fantasies of white supremacy raging through the Western world like an uncontrolled wildfire, it matters, doesn't it? Even here in Canada, who constructs these boundaries? Do we construct our own boundaries, or have they actually been constructed by others and pen us in? And when does perceived autonomy entrap us? Should one, or can one really step outside of one's boundaries, one's microstate, in order to sit at the big people tables where larger, more varied meals are served? Stepping outside, one is always an outsider. But so what to all of this? Outsiderness, when it works, can indeed be one of the most useful tools of a writer. In my early days here, when the publishing of writers of color was scant, I turned to writers from abroad, from countries once colonized by Britain. Among those are Samuel Selvon, Derek Walcott, Earl Lovelace, Jamaica Kincaid, Naipaul, to name but a few. They wrote of their regions in unabridged, hyper-localized languages, and reading them here, in this place, in Canada, had the unexpected effect of making visible the lives and communities of a variety of people right here in Canada who could only participate as Canadians when they performed the outsider side of their hybrid identity. Reading beyond Canada allowed me then to imagine a fuller Canada, to see versions of myself and others who had come, like me, from elsewhere, but had all along been living, if vibrantly, invisibly, right here in this Canada. This reading act allowed me to imagine in my work the place I couldn't clearly see when I lived in it. All my novels written in Canada are set in full or in part back there, where I came from, and which is the place that I left. And it is those writers mentioned above who taught me, and people like me who emigrated at a particular time, but before official colonization, how to do literature in the quintessentially Canadian gap that exists for us between Austen, Woolf, Dickens, etc., and the usual of stereotyping identifiers of Canadian literature, Atwood, Engel, Lawrence, Birdsall, etc. In our toolbox are also the singular of Canadian literature, the empire we here write back to when we marry over there with this here. Today's hyphenated writer, the writer of literatures, divines and conjectures ways to be in this new country by speaking to it about the old one. For she believes the new place can only know and come to appreciate her if she regales it with stories of the old one. She speaks to this new lover of her old one in tones of longing, expecting this will endear her to the new lover. But as the immigrant writer woos the current place, she's always quoting the one left eons ago. She beguiles both with treasure troves and sleights of hand, allowing her present audience to be adventurer and explorer in a world foreign to them, even as she sings a mournful love song, pleading perhaps apologizing to the one she left. Every day now, it seems, we are faced with Pierre Trudeau's elephant, No longer friendly or twitching and grunting next door, but an unhinged behemoth trumpeting erratically. Long employed in the construction of a unified Canadian identity, Canadian culture and content in the various art forms and media, not unlike sport today, have been mandated as armor, and literature, in the singular here, has been participant in that project. From that point of view, is it possible that the notion of literatures, the plural suggestive of work coming out of microstates, little nations within the larger one, might be antithetical to the project of checking the elephant? In the 1990s, Canadian literary publishing was lauded internationally for shifting its focus from a nationalistic literature to, for the first time, post-colonial themes of diasporic experience. I was living in New York City then, and American artists and writers there swooned over us for our social activism, cultural festivals, Desh Pradesh, for Paul Wang's groundbreaking touring exhibition, Yellow Peril Reconsidered, and for the celebration of multiculturalism in the arts in general, and pertinently in literature. They would say, Canadians are so ahead of the times, so politically aware and savvy. But views have now apparently changed. More Canadians are being published than in the 90s. And there's a proliferation, relatively speaking, of diasporic work here that gives a face not just to Canada, but to world history. Yet, few of us make it on the world stage today. My agent tells me despairingly that it is near impossible for our works to be sold outside of Canada now. And I think about why this might be so. The flow of cultures, migrations of people for political, economic, environmental reasons is constant across the world. In diverse areas of present-day worldwide existence, the construction and patrolling of borders appear to be proliferating. My New York friends were right 3 decades ago. We were tearing down walls in the arts here. But could it be that either remaining well ahead of the times or slipping now behind the times, our particular focus on micro-identities as atomized and imploded, creating a narrowing, a flattening effect? Being part of a group can enhance visibility, but will a time come when the grouping slides into kind of neo-ghettoization? And who will have been the perpetrators of this, them or us? Are we in a perverse way patrolling ourselves, boarding ourselves up in subsets of subsets of subsets of literatures in Canada? Perhaps the world does not know what to do with these flagless micro-literatures from micro-states in Canada. Canada has become our world. That other world out there, the world of international distribution and readership, doesn't know where to find us. And yet, all of these literary pockets of difference create something quite remarkable and unique to Canada. Out of the literatures of these many, many microstates has evolved a parallel landscape. This other landscape does not bow to rules of gravity. It cannot be rooted on the ground, as was that of the old canon. This landscape, it's truer than real, not a place that can literally be camped on. It might, in one instance, include a prairie landscape, but that prairie is temporary. Or in another, there might be a Scarborough ravine, but that too, it's interim. How about a southern Gothic hamlet of Ontario? Certainly, but it is also provisional. There might be farmlands, ice, rivers, lochs and lakes, but they are also fleeting. This landscape is a language quilt that hovers brilliantly many, many meters above our heads, undulating right across the rooted landmass called Canada. This babbling quilt is made up of trillions of stories that lifted off their pages are stitched together in patterns that trace the globe. In the ways of music and song, a world of new words and accents emanates from it. This quilt is brought to us by Saeed Tibi, Dion Brand, Billy Ray Belcourt, Vin Wen, Manahil Bandukwala, Jasmine Odor, to unfairly name but just a few of us. It is a landscape of longing, of remembering, of putting down and pulling up and putting down roots, of our ability to survive pasts as we hammer out our constantly shape-shifting present. The books we hold in our hands are a periscope or a snow globe that allows readers a view of the immigrants' parallel existence vibrating literally above this country. They reflect us this other landscape, which is both a tent under which all Canadians live and a gigantic stage set on which the metaphysics of here but not here, there but not there is played out. At dinner in Trinidad not long before he died, Vidya Naipaul said to me, "Why don't you stop writing all of that snow coconut tree business and write from where you are?" Professor Kreisel's words, "You have to know yourself first, then maybe others will know you," interprets that comment for me in another way. It's been an ongoing and welcome challenge to figure out who and where I am, and how to write myself from where I am. Out of this struggle, I've come to suspect that the only way for the hybridized Canadian writer to write themselves into the world literatures is to actually own, to embrace, that is, a state akin to not belonging anywhere. This, I believe, is being just enough ahead of one's time to be able to see, akin to what the New Yorkers had once thought of us. These days, as borders are tightened, as space shrinks, and the intellect is patrolled, as the identities we give to ourselves are constantly overridden by those given to us by others, right where you are, right where I am, seems to be meant more metaphysically than literally. Writers then, in order to be unconfined and undefined, except by oneself, will do best, I think, to expand kite-like beyond place and time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shani. Lise Gaboury-Diallo est aussi une écrivaine extraordinaire. Lise is a poet, a playwright, a short story writer, and a fiercely proud Franco-Manitoban. In 2023, she published her third short story collection, Juste une moitié de lune, and in that same year, she won the Rue de Chambaud Literary Prize for her poetry. And just last year, her play, Pauline Boutel, Entre les toiles et les planches, opened at Le Théâtre Cercle Molière's centennial season. In our bilingual country, it isn't always easy for Francophone writers outside of Quebec, hors du Quebec, to find their audience. Mais Lise has ensured that Manitoba's Francophone community is seen and celebrated. Bienvenue. Lise, je suis très heureuse que vous soyez parmi nous ce soir.
Good evening. Bonsoir. I would like to begin by thanking Senator Paula Simons for her kind words, by thanking Sarah Croats, Elena Plain, Marie Carrière, Nicole Bansma, Dr. Schloss, and all the people behind the organization of the Henry Kreisel Talks, as well as the folks at the Centre for Literatures in Canada, the Centre de Littérature au Canada, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on tonight's theme, Writing in Place, Voices from Canada, from and in Canada. I would also like to thank Shani Mootoo and Richard Van Camp for sharing this special moment with you and me tonight. It is a distinct honor to participate in this special edition of the Henry Kreisel Talks as the CLC celebrates its 20th anniversary. So this is a shorter version of an essay that I've written, and it begins with this epigraph. Sometimes we find ourselves between a rock and a hard place, and sometimes between a word and a heart place. Before diving into this vast subject and situating my enquiry, I must offer a caveat. I have chosen to speak tonight in the first person, and my goal is not to establish traditional detached academic authority, but rather to highlight my own subjectivity, which inevitably informs both my creative and academic work. In my experience, there is no neutral vantage point from which to view the Canadian landscape. I have not yet found a theoretical paradigm that would erase the boundaries and margins I inhabit, and so this lecture offers me the occasion to consider my reframing of place, of Canada specifically, as a site of convergence rather than coherence. When I was preparing for this talk, I slipped down the rabbit hole a few times. Some of the central questions that came to mind were, how can we frame the problem of presence when it comes to writing from or in a place such as Canada? How does imaginative and or physical inhabitation intersect in a literary practice? What forms of responsibility should a writer assume toward the places she inhabits, imagines, and represents, particularly within minoritized cultural, linguistic, and geographic contexts? When I came up for air, one reality suddenly unnerved me. Could I do this talk? As you know, I am a Franco-Manitoban, and I belong to that Francophone minority, tiny minority living outside Quebec. After having taught for over 40 years at the Université de Saint-Boniface and publishing almost exclusively en français, presenting my ideas in English is a daunting task. I must underscore that what you are listening to is not really my first nor my chosen voice. But I have embraced this challenge because this feeling of being in between languages is exactly what it means to be a minority voice in Canada. This linguistic displacement is also instructive. It reminds us that for the minority writer, place is not just a geographic coordinate, but can also be a linguistic struggle, a constant negotiation between the heart place of the mother tongue and the space of the public word. I am often identified as someone writing from a place of linguistic minority or Western geographic marginality. And while this is true, it is incomplete. Like Walt Whitman wrote, I am large, I contain multitudes. In fact, we all do. My thesis tonight is that literary responsibility does not arise from national belonging or territorial authority, but from a sustained, situated, and careful engagement with place as lived, imagined, and historically stratified. I was a professor for 40 years. I just retired, so there's a bit of theory in here. To ground this discussion, let's start by distinguishing between space and place. As theorists such as Henri Lefebvre, Edward S. Casey, and Michel de Certeau have posited, space is abstract, produced, and structured by external forces, whereas place is inhabited. For writers, this distinction is crucial. To write about a place is to intervene in its meaning. Place is not static. It can be practiced, remembered, narrated. Literature, therefore, is not merely a mirror held up to a landscape. It is constitutive. From this distinction between space and place, I will move on to the idea of inhabitation. There are, I believe, two fundamental modes of inhabitation. The first is physical, the embodied experience of climate, object, terrain, daily rituals, etc. The other is imaginative, through memory, dreams, and affective investment. Writers constantly navigate between these two, and their exploration of place contributes to the construction of narratives. They can describe a lived reality or fictitious projection. And we know that imagination offers extraordinary freedom, a freedom which allows writers to explore this beautiful tension between the imagined and the material. For me, my physical place is the Western Canadian prairie. It is the chilling, rugged winter climate that I share with Edmonton, and the buzz of mosquitoes on a hot, hazy summer day. It is the horizontal vastness of the land squaring up against the verticality of man, to reference Laurence Ricou's work. I live in Winnipeg, a city built on gumbo mud, swampy soil. The three rivers run through my hometown, the Red, the Assiniboine, and the Seine. At the forks of the two big rivers, the Red and the Assiniboine, there is a wonderful park where we find the Odenna celebration circle that was built there. Odenna means heart of the nation in Ojibwe, and this site pays homage to 6,000 years of First Nations presence. I now live near the Seine River in Saint-Vital, which is also where I went to a private French primary school. I went to high school and taught in Saint-Boniface. These are two of the three French neighborhoods, the third being Saint-Norbert, where the Red River Métis settled long ago on the territory covered by Treaty Number 1. I have lived most of my life in Manitoba, but my own sense of place was expanded by mobility. Studying in Paris for 4 years made me acutely aware of my otherness. My strange accent, which was not Quebecois, was a constant marker of my minority status. It was in the Ville Lumière, the City of Light, that I met my future husband. When I married him and became Lise Gaboury-Diallo, I followed him, and I lived in Senegal for 2 years. I experienced alterity differently in Western Africa as a Tubab, a white woman, very clearly and quite visibly the outsider. And yet, I also felt strangely at home there. Both the French and the African experiences made me realize that the other who was othering me was a reflection of my own humanity, with my strengths and weaknesses, my doubts and convictions. And all of these layers of otherness, as a Franco-Manitoban, as a French-speaking Canadian in Paris, as a white woman in Senegal, have shaped my voice and my understanding of Canada. I do not experience it as coherence, but rather as a convergence. Indigenous, Anglophone, Francophone, immigrant, transnational, all these voices diverging, different, intersecting, and sometimes colliding. Writing is based on the tension between the self, the word, and the other. It is relational, creating an encounter between the author's voice and the reader or the listener. Susan Sontag, who wrote the introduction to the English translation of Roland Barthes' Writing Degree Zero, contextualizes Barthes' affirmation that language is never innocent. She argues that discourse is never impartial as it carries inherent intentions, cultural consent, and power structures. Writers must be mindful and responsible when using their voice. Sontag also affirms in The Conscience of Words that, and I quote, part of the ethical function of literature is the lesson of the value of diversity, end of quote. This leads me to Édouard Glissant's concepts, developed in his treatise on the whole world and the poetics of relation. where he argues that humanity is an interconnected, dynamic entity. This author believes that we should celebrate the fact that the world's diversity is the result of millennia of métissage, creolization, and I can never pronounce that word, miscegenation. Borrowing the notion of the rhizome from Deleuze and Guattari, the rhizome is a plant which grows horizontally under the ground. Borrowing this notion, Glissant suggests that identity is always built in interaction with the other. It grows horizontally rather than through solitary rootedness. He also reminds us that place is not a backdrop. It is a character in the ongoing drama of human relationships. All of these ideas resonate deeply with me. So how do we write responsibly? By acknowledging the fact that we speak from a place rather than for it. To write in Canada is to speak from within its multiplicity. I believe that any need to express oneself should come with a desire to resist extractive or proprietary models. For example, although I belong to a Francophone community, I have not really embraced the role of spokesperson or torchbearer for Franco-Manitobans. Instead, in all humility, I speak only for myself. And I think that I also seek to attain what Jean-Claude Pinson calls poetics, an attitude where poetry is wrested from the reign of the concept and returned to the world of sensations and affects. Pinson suggests that poetry should not be limited to creative texts, but should extend to everyday life. He sees poetics as a way of leading a poetic life in which we choose to inhabit our world with a heightened sense of responsibility. He also considers poetics an aesthetic built and based on ethics, but also an ecumene of the marginal. And while on the subject of the marginal, I would like to quote the acclaimed critic François Paré, who is a specialist of Francophone minority writing in Canada. He has written at length about its exiguity and fragility. He has observed that minority Francophone culture, and I'm quoting him, can only be understood within the framework of an almost ritualized grasp of displacement, and that understanding what is outside oneself is a constant project at the very heart of minority identity. End of quote. As a scholar, I appreciate this characterization of a linguistic minorities literature. But as a writer, I try not to think about it too much. I simply try to adhere to what I consider being a writer's principal responsibilities. Learn about the culture and histories of others, be aware of cultural, religious, or linguistic minorization or marginalization and their effects. My goal is to ensure that my voice remains authentic to my own moral compass, one that seeks to denounce injustice whenever possible, or to know when to remain silent about a place or situation with which I am unfamiliar. But as we all know, there are moments when silence is not an option. Certain sites demand to be represented. This is the call of place. Numerous and varied are these places that compel us to write stories that must be told. They may be places of discovery, aesthetic encounter, rupture, marked by violence or attachment. In my own practice, I have found that many places have called out to me, especially places of the heart, which often act as a catalyst for creation. When they do, there is always the risk of being too close, too intimate. If one writes across cultures, as I have, one must be very wary, vigilant. It requires resisting exoticism, resisting appropriation, resisting the illusion that one can fully inhabit another's history or story. The call of place also intersects with linguistic identity, as in my case. Choosing to write in French in Western Canada is a political statement. It asserts my presence and situates me both within and outside the majority culture. I am aware of writing from an in-between place. I too have suffered from what linguists called linguistic insecurity, when writing becomes a form of strained negotiation between how one sees oneself and how one is seen by others. Responding to any kind of call is a recognition that place is interlocutory. To write about a place is to enter into a dialogue with its presences, its silences, its histories, and contested spaces. Foreigners often imagine Canada as a cohesive national space, but I experience it as a series of overlapping, layered, or contradicting landscapes. At local and national levels, contemporary Canadian writing sometimes confronts foundational myths. When this happens, we must remember that decolonization is not a metaphor, as Eve Tuck and Wayne Yang remind us. Romanticized narratives of settlement often obscure Indigenous sovereignty and minority histories. We write not for Canada, but in Canada. Aware of contested ground, writers should strive to resist the seduction of a unified literary nationalism that erases difference. As I've said before, writing Canada is always relational. On the one hand, it should be about listening to place and refusing to overwrite it. On the other, it should be a dialogue between self, place, and the other. I believe transnational perspectives enrich this dialogue. By situating Canadian experiences alongside international ones, writers can trace the flow of history and migration. Writing becomes a practice of observing how colonial legacies manifest differently and how local specificity intersects with broader global movements and frameworks. No text emerges alone. Writing is a palimpsest, a rewriting. Every sentence carries traces of others' stories layered over prior narratives. We write over layers of oral traditions, preexisting literatures, colonial legacies, and minority histories. Writing is not an act of closure, it is an act of continuity. It is a process of inhabiting and responding to place and experiences, shaping the trajectory of meaning without determining it. And so as I conclude, let me return to my key initial question: what does it mean to write from or in a place such as Canada? It means that we should not write over place, but with it. We must remain aware of our own biases, remembering that words can be reappropriated, misinterpreted, or worse, misused. We must avoid the cultural appropriation trap and the romanticized exoticism that Edouard Said critiqued. When I look back at what I've written, I am struck by how often I have found myself caught between a word and a heart place. My guiding premise remains a sense of indebtedness to the places I inhabit and have inhabited. Canada is not a unified narrative. It is a constellation of languages, cultures, and communities. In order to write within this constellation, I try to remain attentive, humble, and accountable. Sometimes the most responsible act a writer can perform is to know when to remain silent. And when we do speak, we must do so from a place of poetics. We must recognize that our identities are plural. Ultimately, writing in place is about an ethical and respectful relationship with the world. It is about acknowledging that we are guests on this land and in these stories. By remembering that we work with fallible subjectivities and by resisting the urge to simplify the other, we can begin to narrate a Canada that is as complex and stratified as the soil beneath us. Thank you. Merci.
Well, first of all, a round of applause for all three of our remarkable
Good job. Good job. Bravo. Bravo. That was incredible.
thank you.
Great job.
I want this to be a conversation amongst the three of you, but I want to start with some ideas that came from Lise's last presentation, where she talked about the difference between space and place not as a backdrop, but as a character. I just finished reading Starry, Starry Night, which is a book in which the place, the Trinidad in which your character lives, is so real and so powerful. I mean, I felt like I was there. But there is that, the sense of, are you exoticizing? Are you romanticizing? To what extent do you owe a duty to that place that you were writing from?
I'm always careful, I think, I try to be careful not to exoticize. Place, to my mind, it's so many things. The first thing that comes to mind is the possibility that place is the ground. It's on which people act, on which things happen. But I think the two things influence each other. The environment, the flora, the fauna, the way people construct neighborhoods, relationships that are made, and so on. I mean, I was really struck by, Naipaul saying to me, why don't you stop writing all this snow coconut tree business? And what I realized, the challenge for me in Canada was that I did not know how to write Canada. And I eventually did a whole big project, both photography and poetry, and then novel writing, trying to understand this place that I was in, to stop being a tourist all the time in Canada, in this place that I was a citizen and living. I had to stop being a tourist. Everything I saw was like out there, and to actually begin to live in the land. That was a challenge. I didn't know how to do that. So the novel Polar Vortex, that was the book that I wrote to try to meet that challenge, to see the landscape, the Canadian landscape. So that novel is actually set in Canada, whereas all my others sort of move back and forth, so, except for this last one, which is entirely in Trinidad. But Polar Vortex was set here in the town that I live in Bloomfield, in Prince Edward County. And my attempt was to try to do that, yeah.
Lise, you spoke beautifully on your theme. I want to ask you a question about one of Shani's themes, which is this sense of, does the writer truly belong in the place that they write about? Or is the writer always an outsider, always an observer who doesn't belong anywhere?
I do agree with that idea that we're always a bit on the outside, observing. But we do belong to a community. It's just that not everybody appreciates the work that we do. So, for example, if we talk about a minority voice, it's very hard to find people who know my work. It just doesn't go beyond Manitoba. And when I go to Quebec, you'll find my books in the littérature étrangère.
Oh,
4
wow.
works.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so you're always a bit of an outsider. I don't know if the status of being a writer makes me an outsider, but definitely being a minority writer, yes. Mm-hmm.
There's a benefit to it too, though, don't you think? Because being an outsider, you almost have a right, as it were, to be able to look and to speak and to say. And sometimes you look and speak and say things that people don't want to hear, but that need to be said.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly, yeah.
All right, so then Richard, let me take that theme over to you. I mean, when you write about the small community in which you grew up, when you write about the larger Indigenous community, I was a journalist for 30 years. Sometimes you make observations about a community that people don't particularly want to hear. So is it difficult sometimes to find the courage to tell the truth, knowing that you're writing for a community of people who your aunties and your mom and your neighbors might be reading this?
Absolutely. So, do you remember the TV show North of 60?
Yes.
So, years ago, I was shoveling out a dog pen in Edzo, Northwest Territories. My boss, Moise Rebeska, came out and said, "Hey, Van Camp, someone's on the phone for you. Make it quick." And I was like, "Yes, boss. Yes, boss." And when they make a movie about my life, it's going to open with that, me shoveling out this dog pen. The dogs are watching me. It looks like I'm wearing a moving sweater, but those are bugs. Those are mosquitoes, bulldogs, hair eaters.
All right, see, so we can all see this now.
And
we can smell it too, I
He walks
think.
out with this little satellite phone. I am just so grateful to take a break. And he goes, "Make it quick. Gonna have to dock you." I'm like, "Sorry, boss. I'm sorry, somebody's calling me." And I go, "Hello?" And it was Jordan Wheeler. And he goes, "Richard Van Camp." And I go, "Yes, Jordan Wheeler calling you from Bray Creek, Alberta, on the set of North of 60. Hey, listen, Richard Wagamese just quit. How'd you like to come and be our new writer trainee for the show?" Yes, sir. Meanwhile, Moise Rebeska's going, right? He goes, "How soon can you start?" I'm like, "Now." All right, let's set up some plane tickets. Gloria will call you. Anyways, so I ended up becoming the writer trainee for North of 60, and I learned something crucial there, and that was the producers and the directors had created a fictional community called Lynx River. And it was an amalgamation of Fort Simpson and Trout Lake, and a little bit of Hay River, a little bit of Yellowknife, a little Betchico. What they wanted was for viewers to let their guard down and just enjoy the show. And also they didn't want to get sued. And they didn't want their tires slashed and all that stuff. That has saved me so many times when I created Fort Simmer, which The Lesser Blessed is set in.
Yes.
So many stories are set in Fort Simmer. And then I lost a dear friend to suicide. And his name was Paul Grundy. And he was our town lawyer. He was one of our leaders in our community. I bought a little trailer there. He was my lawyer. He was supposed to do my will. He was a father. He was a son. He was a brother. He was a friend. And I remember when I went to go write Dog Rib Midnight Runners, I said it in Fort Simmer, and I went, no. I'm going to own this, and I'm going to set this in Fort Smith, because we need to talk about mental health, and we need to talk about male grief, because if we don't, we're going to keep burying our brothers. And so I took responsibility for the first time and set a story in Fort Smith. And when I go back, when there's readings, that's the story people ask me to read. They say, "Read Paul's story. Read Paul's story." And I think sometimes we have to say, I take full responsibility, just like what we were hearing tonight. I take full responsibility. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to own this. And the beauty now is when I write something, I go, where are we going to set this? Are we going to, because sometimes you need to create a fictional community to tell your most difficult truths. And other times you need to say, no, this is our community. This was one of our sons, right?
Yeah.
And I own this with him to honor him. But every author has to make up their mind about how far they're willing to welcome that readership in.
So I've been playing this game where I've been taking people's ideas and posing them to other folks. So one of the really powerful things that Richard talked about was storytelling and literature as medicine, as a way of giving a community back its voice and back its spirit. So Lise, I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've talked about how hard it is to be a Francophone writer not from the metropole of Montreal, how hard it is to be a Francophone writer in a majority Anglophone part of Canada, how hard it is to be a Westerner, period, and we know. So what do you think of the metaphor, of Richard's metaphor of writing as a source of medicine, a source of soul healing?
I totally agree. When I was teaching, because I've just retired, so I'm still in the transitional phase. When I taught, I made it a point to teach Francophone writers from Western Canada so that my students who are Francophone would know that there were other people who were writing in French that were living the same types of lives that they were living. And I just published Pauline Boutal, which is this play about this woman who directed the theater, the longest running theater in all of Canada, all in both languages, French and English. Le Cercle Molière has been running for 100 years, nonstop. One of the directors was a woman, and she was there for almost 30 years, and she was a visual artist. They approached me and asked me if I would write a commemorative historical play about this woman. And at first I said, oh, I'm not really a playwright, but I'll give it a try, and if it's good, then we'll move with that and see what happens. I wrote the play, and it is really a play that will probably not travel very much because it resonates in Winnipeg. It's medicine for people in Winnipeg because they can see somebody who was a role model, who was a woman, who was very strong and ahead of her times. So I'm very happy that I wrote the play, and it was, in a sense, medicine for me because I discovered so much about this woman. And I think it was also a way of sharing this medicine with all the Francophone community so that they could discover who Pauline Boutal really was. Yeah.
So I'm just going to add, and this is completely extraneous, that the Speaker of the Senate is from Saint-Boniface, Raymond Gagné, and she is organizing a celebration in the Senate next month for the 100th anniversary of the Molière Theatre. Mm-hmm. So Shani, I wanted to ask you, when you're writing a piece like Starry, Starry Night that is fiction, but obviously very clearly based on your own life story, what duty do you owe to the real people that you're writing about? I mean, some of what you reveal about your family is pretty grim.
I thought you said it was fiction.
It is fiction. It's not about your family. It's about somebody else who is remarkably like you.
No, it's not fiction.
So how do you balance, then, the responsibility you owe to the real people that you're writing about and your own truth?
That is a really, really good question. I did have to wait until, I'd been working on this novel for about 35 years, not ever really intending to publish it. But the funny thing is, I think that it's a very, very difficult work to have done. I think working on all the other novels was a way of training. I didn't realize this, but training me how to write this one. In the meantime, both my parents passed away. My father had once said to me, they didn't speak with me for many, many years because of my sexuality. Someone called them at one point and said, you've got to read her work, people are talking about it, and so on. The 8-year period where they weren't talking to me ended with my father calling me and saying, we don't get along. But I read your book, you write really well, don't stop writing. Write whatever you want, do not censor yourself. And I've always taken that with me. However, I called my parents once a month and would try to make connections with them. And I have to say that by the time I came to this novel, before my parents died, I had a really nice relationship with them. I have to balance what the truth is with that respect for them. I do think in the novel I show my fascination with my father and my admiration of him as a magician, as a politician, as a doctor. He was just dynamic. But I also show the trouble that I had with my mother. I showed how he was influenced. So balancing all these relationships from the point of view of a child, seeing it all happening. There's that love, the confusion. I don't know how else to answer the question, but it's like trying to tell the truth without hurting anyone. One thing I did have to make sure was that I was never, ever engaging in revenge.
Yeah. I want to circle back to Henry Kreisel. Because when he came to this place, and decided he was going to write a novel about it in the 1950s. I think it came out in 1964, The Betrayal. You know, he was to Edmonton what V.S. Naipaul was to Trinidad, what Gabriel Roy was for the Francophone community in Manitoba, what Maria Campbell was for the Métis community here. So I wonder if you can each give me one thought before we close about the duty that writers owe to the places where they are rooted, and what obligation you have to the legacy of the place, not just the characters that you create and the stories that you tell.
Well, I suppose because I am a Franco-Manitoban, that I want to honor my ancestors. I don't know why they stopped in Manitoba and didn't go further south, but I do honor the fact that there is a kind of resilience there. A lot of people say, oh, in French it works, in English it doesn't work. Les prairies, c'est plate. In other words, it's really flat. But there is some beauty in that. I do feel a certain indebtedness to being able to experience nature. Daniel Lavoie, in one of his songs, has said, and I can't really translate it very well, there's just so much sky, so many stars. It's just, yeah, that's what I feel when I think about place. I think of the landscape and the people, and I want to honor them.
Shani?
I don't know, I can't think of responsibility to place as a writer.
Well.
I can think of responsibility. I mean, you know, when I came here to Canada, the day that I decided that I was going to apply for grants, that's when I decided I was going to become a Canadian before I fill out the application. I had to become a Canadian first. My responsibility to place is kind of mundane. It's not about writing. If I were to try to think of some other kind of noble answer, it would be simply to be honest and to be truthful, but not to laud a place, simply not as a tourist kind of manifesto or something like that I'm always producing, you know. But no, to always be honest, because it's not about how other people will see it. It's about what you're experiencing, and hopefully you're experiencing with some kind of integrity.
I agree with both of our esteemed writers completely. I completely agree. When people look back on my career, they'll say, boy, did that guy ever love being from Fort Smith. Did he ever devote his life to honoring the Dene people? That is the son of Denendeh that really, as I started to reclaim my Cleacho identity, you know, learning about the devastation of residential schools, because we never talked about it, right? Yeah. Growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and you read Gather, my book, you know, I was my little one, Azazi, gave me the courage to ask my mom, Rosa, in my 40s, what was your first night like in residential school? It was my son gave me that courage to ask the question we'd all been wanting to ask for years. Yeah. I just love being from the north, and I love being in Edmonton. I think Edmonton, it's like a big small town. It's like one big sleepover here. And Edmonton always has time for stories. There's such kindness here. So anyways, I just want to say I'm so proud to be from Fort Smith, and I've been so lucky to be able to work with so many knowledge keepers and elders who I've earned the trust of, and I take that very, very seriously. You know, when Henry and Eileen Beaver want me to write about something, and they say, you know, you should really talk about how we used to call February the starving month. You should write about that. You can bet I will. Yeah, you can bet. And I will with them, with their permission and all that good stuff. So anyways, Masi Cho, everybody. This has been an absolute delight and a dream come true.
Well, I couldn't be more proud to be from Edmonton and to be here tonight.
Thank you to our authors, Lise, Shani, Richard.
Thank you.
For this beautiful constellation of talks.
Yes.
Thank you to Senator Simons for making this an experience of community and community building for us, as well as the literary experience that it always is. Please join me in thanking everyone, and thank you all for coming.